My name is Andrea. I'll be your host for this evening. Alongside me, I have Austin and Katie, who will be introducing themselves momentarily. We are part of the Inspira Advantage team. Before we really get started on tonight's topic, how to plan for med school acceptance, I do have just a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, this webinar is recorded. You will receive a recording within your inbox within a day or two. That is the question that I get every single time we're on here. So rest assured you will receive a recording. In terms of how long we're looking at running tonight's webinar, we're looking at running it for about 45 minutes to an hour. We'd love to, the majority of it to be a discussion. Austin, Katie will be leading it. We'll be going through a couple of points, creating an effective admissions timeline, building a standout application profile, securing strong letters of recommendation, building a compelling application narrative. But alongside these, what we love to do is we love to have a ton of Q&A. So there'll be a couple of points throughout the webinar where we'll take a quick pause and get your questions answered. So whether that be about something we had just covered or a question about the admissions process, please don't hesitate to use the chat. Throw in your questions at us. Our team will try and get to as many of them as possible. Now, a little bit about us. As mentioned, we're Inspira Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 15 years of experience. We specialize in helping students gain admission to top graduate healthcare programs like medical, residency, dental, veterinary, PA, and nursing with a 94% acceptance rate, something we're incredibly proud of. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer pre-health advising for college freshmen. Our team helps students build a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like research, shadowing, clinical and non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, and leadership roles, making their application stand out from the rest with a stellar personal statement and interview prep. These steps lay a foundation to differentiate applicants and make them leave a lasting impact and impression. In addition, our tutors provide personalized one-on-one test prep for MCAT, DAT, and GRE. With diagnostic tests, study plans, and interim progress stats, students see scores increase, an average of 15 points on the MCAT with a 45 plus hours of tutoring. Our 60-hour programs even include score guarantees, 515 for the MCAT. When it's time to apply, our all-inclusive application programs offer unlimited support through the entire application process. This includes creating a personalized narrative and school list, perfecting personal statements and essays with unlimited edits, providing interview prep, scholarship guidance, and waitlist strategy. We're by our students' side until they receive their acceptances. Our goal is very simple, to create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine in the competitive admissions landscape. If you'd love to learn more, we offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. No matter where you are in the application process, we're here to help. We're here to support you. We want to make sure that you land that dream school. With that being said, I'd love to pass it over to our two panelists to introduce themselves. Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys, for coming and letting us kind of talk at you today. Hopefully, we can get all your questions answered. This is a kind of a broad topic. My name's Katie. I am from California originally, went to Virginia Commonwealth University for medical school in Richmond, and I'm currently a fourth year of 6 plastic surgery resident at University of Wisconsin.
Yeah, wanted to echo Katie. Thanks for the great turnout. Always is wonderful to see you all, at least virtually. My name's Austin. I originally came from a small town in Colorado called Rye. Made it all the way to Stanford Medical School somehow. And now I am a dermatology resident at Stanford doing my transitional year at a place in Salt Lake City, which can get confusing at this stage, but that's not what today's about.
Okay, so I'll just start us off. This whole talk is really going to be about almost broad strokes of how to perfect your application and prepare for your application for medical school acceptance, ideally. So I think, and I think Austin would agree, the best way to go about this is to have a plan and be able to work that plan. And so the foundations for this winning strategy is really just having an organized plan, making the deadlines that you know are coming up, and going about it with kind of like precision and accuracy. And ideally, we create this application that demonstrates this longitudinal narrative that is genuine to who you are and your passions for medicine. And so that's kind of what the whole talk's going to be about, and little bits and pieces of how to do that.
My bad. That was me. All right, get into the sort of details of this. Again, this is like a broad overview sort of presentation, but I think importantly at the front of the line is looking at the timeline of applying to medical school or any professional school for that matter. And it really, really pays off to be precise with things. Dates, knowing your school schedule, knowing when your courses are going to be. If you line it up, great. With the rolling admissions process that is medical school, it can boost your ability to get in exponentially, in my opinion. And one of those big components of crafting a good timeline is course building. And in that case, you have to think not only can you get everything done on time, but can you get everything done on time in order to prepare for the big test that is the MCAT, right? So in that case, oftentimes the best way to do this, if you're not looking to take too much time off, is to get your courses for prereqs, so to speak, for both the MCAT and med school done by the end of junior year. That way you're at your top performance when you come across that test, and you don't have to worry about studying for a course that you have never taken in that way. And then when you get to actually applying and get beyond the MCAT and the courses, it pays to be early. And you are going to have to go through multiple stages to get through this process. But if you're early at every point, again, the rolling admissions process is such a huge factor that it pays to be proactive, and that can be really tough. So again, focusing on a precise timeline is super, super important at every single stage, prior to application, through application, and actually beyond. I'm still focusing on it today.
So importantly, kind of every decision that you make along this getting ready to apply period has to do with how to make yourself shine in the application. I always tell clients and students that I think the hardest part of the med school application is convincing someone to let you interview, convincing someone to let you in, because everyone that you're applying with is a great candidate. Everyone's working really hard. So we want to find ways to make your application shine. And one way you can do that is by highlighting key experiences. So these are things that are hopefully unique to you. Everyone kind of has the same clumps of things, whether that's research, volunteering, shadowing, etc. But really demonstrating what your strengths are in your application. So whether that's, perhaps a volunteer opportunity that you've been doing for 8 years, or something that's unique that really demonstrates that longitudinal interest and passion, those are the key things to highlight, as well as other unique qualities that you may have. For example, obstacles that you've come across that may be more unique to you, leadership opportunities, and teamwork opportunities. I also think that customer service opportunities kind of falls in here for me. I think that's actually quite a strength if you have some experience with that. It demonstrates some skills that I think are certainly useful as a physician and as a medical student. So any of those things that you can demonstrate, obviously med schools are interested in seeing, and you just want to be sure that you're representing those well on your application. Oh, sorry, I tried to next. Let's see. Okay.
All right. Now, that slide was about advocating for yourself, essentially telling admissions committees why you would be a great future doctor. But you need support from those third parties who will also go to bat for you. And thus, securing strong letters of recommendation is not something to be taken lightly. It takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of getting to know certain people, and you want to do it in a way that you get to shine from all angles in your application. And these LORs, as they're otherwise called, are super important because there's multiple of them, from science professors, non-science professors, those that you shadow, those that you work with. And so importantly, from a general perspective, you don't want to just go for the one with the fanciest title. That's oftentimes also the busiest person. And if you haven't developed a strong relationship with them, they can't speak to your strengths that someone who may be more junior in their career but knows you better could. And I cannot emphasize that enough, from like both my experience with med school applications and residency now too. Someone who knows you better is better than someone who is known by the field. And of course, it's best to have both, right? To have the mentor who has guided you through all your years of college, who is also really well known to certain med schools. That's great. But if you have to choose or don't have the opportunity, as certain schools do, like I went to the University of Denver, and it's not a big like pre-med feeder school, you want to find the people that can mentor you in different aspects: research, volunteering, school, so on and so forth, and give them everything that you have from the perspective of the relationship, as well as the details outside of that, such as a CV, to help them craft that letter for you. And that's getting a little bit more into the details, but the big picture is here. You really want to develop longitudinal relationships with people who will be important for you throughout your entire college career, and not just in one area.
So this, hopefully your letter writers can also speak to and add to this component of your application, but it's crafting and demonstrating this narrative for the person who's going to be reading your application. So obviously they don't get to talk to you. You don't get to explain your story. So crafting this narrative that's demonstrated throughout your application, not just saying your personal statement, is so essential for demonstrating who you are to them. So connecting your experiences. I think this is so key. Honestly, I think this is best done in the personal statement, this particular bullet point, but really connecting why you've done this, sequence of experiences in this order. A lot of times this looks like, I was exposed to medicine through this, primary experience. It piqued my curiosity, which made me, interested in this field of research. So that's why I became why I sought this experience in a research lab. I presented at this conference where I met this guy who I shadowed. And so like this, it gives you this kind of streamlined narrative of like how you got to this point and from where did you start. And that's what we try to demonstrate throughout the whole application. But I think a lot of times that story comes out quite nicely in the personal statement. You always want to demonstrate growth. And sometimes this can be in your free response answers in the application or your statement, but you want to demonstrate areas where you perhaps overcame obstacles, or there was something where, the odds were against you, and even sometimes in a controlled way, a time that you failed and were able to learn from and grow from that. That is something that's going to happen to everyone at some point in medical school and in their career as a physician. And so demonstrating to medical schools that you already have the skills to overcome those things and to be resilient is like such a key factor for who's going to do well in school, medical school. So also like showcasing that your values and your priorities align with the medical schools that you're applying to. Sometimes this comes out a little bit more in a tailored way in your secondary applications, which is a little bit over the scope of this talk, but you can demonstrate that your values align with many of the mission statements and values of the medical schools as well. And those kind of buzzwords come through when people are reading your applications. And then always I recommend, it is not actually in your best interest to just say what you think people want to hear. It's actually in your best interest to be genuine and authentic in your application in a professional way, of course, but you don't want to match at a school that doesn't align with your interests and your values. It's going to make everything that's already hard even harder. And so for that reason, I think being authentic and genuine in your application helps kind of self-select a school that is best suited for you.
So I just want to take a quick moment to just check in with our audience. What questions do you have for us? Please take a moment, get it in the chat box, and we'll get Austin and Katie to look over them and see what we can answer. With that being said, I also want to quickly draw your attention to the QR code on screen. It actually, if you take out your phones, it'll lead you back to a landing page where you're able to book one-on-ones with one of my really awesome colleagues about where you can chat about whether it's your primary application, your interview prep. If there's a particular question you have for our admissions counselors and experts, please don't hesitate to book that one-on-one as well. And I think those are a really great opportunity to go over any sort of questions you have about your unique situation, which we otherwise might not be able to talk about on this call. I do have a question in the chat. Can one of your LORs be from a research mentor from a 10-week program, or does this make the impression that they don't know us long enough? Do our LORs have to be from people who have known for at least a year?
I would say, to answer your first question, I think your letters of rec could be from anyone for any duration that you've known them. It really just depends on how closely you interacted with someone in this period. I would say 10 weeks is a pretty short time and a pretty limited interaction, but perhaps you were working at the benchtop with them 8 hours a day. And, it's hard to say how, I don't know how meaningful this relationship was, but if it is meaningful enough, 10 weeks, I there's no real time frame cutoff, in my opinion. What you want them to do is be able to speak in depth about your character and your skills and things like that. So from your perspective, from a research perspective, your character, your skills, what project you worked on, your work efficiency, things like that. And I think it's not a red flag for me that it was such a short-term thing. They just need to be able to do that well. So it's a little bit specific to your situation. There's no, in my opinion, do they have to know us for at least a year? In my opinion, there's no hard timeline cutoff. It's really just about the depth of the relationship. What do you think, Austin?
No, I think you answered it completely. It's all about depth. It's way different seeing them once a week versus seeing them for most of the day every day, because 10 weeks of that can maybe lend a longitudinal relationship. So, yeah.
Awesome. So I think we can answer one more question. And I think this is absolutely fantastic. I was searching this on the web and I saw that getting an A- in science prerequisite classes looks bad on a medical school application. Is this true?
Go for it, Austin.
So, University of Denver did count like they had A's and A-. Some universities don't do this. So I want to qualify that you should look at your college universities. They do GPA calculations differently, which is why this is a hard question to answer, because in the grand scheme of things, what you're kind of asking is impact on your GPA. And thankfully, A- are not the craziest impact on your GPA. I had A- and it turned out fine. But you're right in the sense of like, you want to have a high science GPA as much as you can. There's certain like OChem 3, if it's really tough, it's okay if you get an A-. Nobody is perfect applying to medical school. And there's so many other important elements of your application that outweigh that. And I will say from personal experience, many of my cohort at Stanford Medical School were not let in because they were the best test takers. It's because they were the best people with the best experiences. And for that reason, I err towards no with the A-. I think A- are great. But from an objective standpoint, having a higher GPA is always better.
Yeah, totally agree. It's just based on in my opinion, just based on the GPA, a couple of A- on your science prereqs, as long as your GPA is great and your experiences are good, it really shouldn't, I don't even think should probably weigh against you at all, in my opinion.
Amazing. Thank you both. We have a ton of questions flowing into the chat, so I think we can save those towards the end of the presentation. I will give it back to you guys to speak about insights.
Okay, I think I am up. Oh, this is a perfect segue. So this is the idea of what do admissions committees look for. And this is gained through experience, gained through knowledge of our base of people here. But generally, you look for those qualities that will make a great doctor. Being a doctor is a tough job. Therefore, resilience, grittiness is at the top of mind. Being a doctor is a team sport, regardless of how specialized you become. And therefore, teamwork is super, super important. And then, honestly, covering all of that is your level of empathy, your ability to relate to people, care for your teammates, care for your colleagues, and do so under stress. I would say those, of course, are the top three, and those may be no surprise to you. But the idea from this slide is that you you need to keep those in the front of your mind when writing about your experiences, talking about interviews, talking to your letter of recommendation writers, and really prioritize those experiences that highlight one or all of those qualities, as well as the ones that you hold dear. For example, for me, it's like conscientiousness, always being on time, always doing things with thought and completing them to the end, that sort of thing. And then to stand out, because a lot of people, as Kitty has mentioned, are going to be competitive with you. The idea is you should be tailoring your application as much as you can to specific schools. It can be hard with the mission and value statements. They can sometimes overlap, but if you see enough of them, you'll eventually start figuring out this one's a research institution. This one really is caring for a lot of underserved populations, and you can tailor your application for that. And then most importantly, like in every element, staying away from being generic. Everyone who wants to become a doctor hopefully wants to help people, and getting away from that and towards specific examples and showing and not telling is the most important differentiator in success. And that's across the whole spectrum. And that's including helping your letter writers write such letters for you. So really importantly, it's thinking about the qualities that match the most with you, knowing the top 3 that they're looking for, and making sure you present that in the form of experiences and showing the admissions committee you have already been demonstrating them.
So creating one component, obviously, of your application is creating this impactful personal statement. We've already talked about how this personal statement can kind of demonstrate who you are in narrative form. So of course, that's going to be a component of what we want to include here, but also focusing on, I don't like to say like light bulb moment. Most folks don't have, in my opinion, don't have a light bulb moment where they're like, medicine's the thing, and then they devote their whole life to that. I think it's really an accumulation of experiences, and I think it's okay to demonstrate that. But really, that's what you want to show in your personal statement is, how did you come to this conclusion, and help the reader understand that, so they can understand your background and your context and your passion for this field. So that's what you want to really describe, is how did you kind of come to this conclusion that you are going to commit basically your life to this interest and passion. And that helps give them context, but then also demonstrate how did you come to this conclusion, but then what have you done to support that conclusion and support your interest in this field. And that should be what your personal statement is hoping to achieve. Of course, you're going to highlight motivations and qualities that you want to demonstrate. I will say a couple of caveats, my own kind of tips and pearls, and Austin, you can throw some in if you have some too. A couple of things. The first is that your personal statement should absolutely not be like a repetition of your CV. You may repeat some experiences that you've had, but it should not be, I did this experience and I learned this and we did this. I did this experience and I learned this. It really shouldn't be that at all. The rest of your application already does that. This should be more about you and how you came to this field and what your interests are in it. And then, some advice that I got when I was applying as a medical student or as a pre-med, and then again as a medical student writing my personal statement for residency, is about 90% of the personal statements that come across a reviewer's desk are fine. They're just okay. The person seems reasonable. They have a reasonable story that kind of blends in with everyone else's reasonable story. I had a family member that had a healthcare interaction, and that made me interested, and I did this research and yada yada. And they're fine, and they don't like help or hurt your application. 5% are red flags. They say something kind of sketchy. Someone can't work doesn't sound like they would work well in a team. Red flag type stuff. And then 5% are really outstanding. 5% make you put down the rest of the application and get this person an interview because you need to meet them. And when I am helping clients, that is what I'm going for. We don't want your personal statement to just be fine. If it is, that's okay too. But ideally, you have a personal statement that is crafted to you and kind of urges the reviewer to come to let you interview so they can meet you. And how you get that is honestly working a long time on it and tweaking it over and over and over again, and really getting to your own motivations, doing a lot of introspection to craft that. And I could go on about this forever. I love talking about this, but I'll just cut it off there. There's a lot of work that can go into this personal statement to make it really, really good.
Okay, now thinking of things to avoid, those common pitfalls that are really important to know. This idea of lacking focus in your narrative is really like high level looking across your primary application, personal statement, experiences, most meaningful experiences, and hopefully the LORs as well, even though you can't see those as well. It's making sure that even though you have a diversity of experiences, which is important, you don't want them scattered to the point that you're looking like you can't choose between things and haven't developed a specific passion. Now, that is distinctly different from being well-rounded. It is okay to be well-rounded, but it is important to show at least some sort of focus or passion you found within the realm of medicine, a specific interest or a specific idea within medicine that you want to pursue. It could be research, clinical, serving underserved populations, any sort of that. And if you're able to craft a direction in your narrative between the experiences and personal statement that showcases that, it can show that you've put a lot of thought into applying to med school and are not just doing it because your parents told you to do it, frankly. And again, like you'll see, the second bullet point is a restatement. Not being generic is so important. That's what Katie was talking about, was the 90% of applications that usually contain some form of generic stuff. And super important to get away from cliches. Again, helping people thing, everyone knows that part. It's how do you want to help people, and how do you show that you're already helping people, and how does that reflect who you are as a person as well as an applicant? Because there will be people who are having similar clinical experiences and research experiences, similar level of academic accolades, but what does that mean to you? And that's really important, the way to get away from generic statements. And then I would say my favorite one to talk about out of these pitfalls is the avoidance of missed deadlines. I cannot say enough that all your work can go to nothing if you miss a deadline. Like they are cutthroat about deadlines, and you want to be as early as possible. Rolling admissions is a very real thing, especially for med school. It matters so much. You get more opportunities to get into a school if you're early on things. So please plan ahead for that. That is one thing that you can control. There's often a lot of randomness in med school applications, but you can control your ability to turn things in on time.
Austin, for one just tidbit, that can be actually really confusing sometimes, the way they list it on sites. They say like applications are due from this date to this date. You can turn them in anytime from this date to this date. And that is, in my opinion, very deceptive. The answer is it's due on the first date. Yeah. That is the only answer. It's just due on the first date. Just like Austin said, your odds go up statistically significantly better if you get it in on the first date that things are available on. Okay, continue.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That we need to hammer that home. And I think, again, the LOR, we had that slide. The LORs matter, even though you probably will waive your right to see them and can't see them. They make a big difference, especially in those cases where you have like some committee letters and other things that overall they are that outsider perspective of your application that can either really strengthen it or can contradict it. You do not want contradictions. You don't want something that is blah. And this same method of making sure that you develop a relationship with the LR writers so that your letters are as strong as your personal statement is important. So don't avoid that, and especially plan for those relationships early on.
So navigating the application process, we've touched on a bit of all of these things in some way, but understanding the requirements, this actually takes, I think, quite a bit of personal research. So every school, not every school, many schools have different requirements in terms of prerequisites and materials and things like that. Some require one thing and not the other. And so just in my opinion, more organization is better here. If you have a list of schools that you're interested in my opinion, again, every single school needs to be gone through to see what materials they need and make sure that we are meeting that criteria. Because what you don't want to happen is applications have been turned in and you find out you've wasted some amount of money and time on a school that you don't really qualify for. So just go through those things and make sure that you're meeting all the criteria for all the schools you're interested in applying to. This is, again, organization is a key point. That's not just the criteria and the materials we just talked about, but also scores and documents and timelines and things like that. So just make sure you are super on top of all of the needs and when they're due by, and then tracking your progress. I do recommend a spreadsheet. I think it's a nice way to visually see that you've accomplished things or what things still need to be accomplished, and it helps keep you on track. But to each their own. If you have a better way of doing it, great, but that's just kind of the most common way.
Okay. I honestly think med school interviews were the most fun part about it, even though it can be extremely anxiety provoking in the beginning. And I am a self-proclaimed introvert, even though I'm in front of you tonight. And so in this case, preparation is so key. There are so many things you can do to prepare for interviews. You have your near peers and your mentors that you can do mock interviews with. You have software nowadays that can help you answer questions and record you and provide feedback. And I'm now assuming that even AI can help a little bit more with that too, even though I'm getting a little bit older in my generation to speak to that. But I think from the base perspective, you will come across, why do you want to be a doctor? What's your biggest success, greatest weakness, greatest strength, so on and so forth. But you'll also come across these, tell me about a time when questions. And in those cases, there's specific methods and approaches to that. And one of those is the STAR method, the situation, task, action, result method. It's very similar to what you may do to talk about something in your primary application, where you want, of course, for the person who is interviewing you to understand the situation that you're talking about, but that can't be your entire answer. That's telling a story. Showing a story is then going to the point of saying what you did, your task and action there. What were you supposed to do? What did you do? And what was the result of that? Did it increase the grades for the people you were tutoring? Did it result in a new program for a really underserved area of your campus or community? And you really want to highlight again what you learned from that as well, the result and reflection part of that. So if you hit all those pillars while you're answering something, that's a really great way to, no matter what the nerves, be able to answer a question completely. And then demonstrating professionalism is, usually fairly easy. Of course, getting yourself the right interview attire, dressing appropriately, not swiveling around in your chair, active engagement, not yawning, that sort of stuff. But I think one of the ones that I want to highlight is this maintaining confident body language. And that I've noticed it with people, they may get more muted, less voice inflection when they're trying to talk in their interview. They're a little bit more nervous about things. But in the end, they want to see who you are as that animated person. They want to see the smiles and the laughs, appropriately so. And for that reason, it's really important to, again, see yourself and have others see you interview, because you may be a completely different person in those scenarios. And to know how to rectify that is really important and may seal the deal for medical school acceptance.
And then when you're reviewing your application for submission, of course, you're going to triple check things. This says double check, but honestly, if you, most pre-meds are a similar type of person, you're going to triple and quadruple check things, as you should. So you should do that for accuracy and completeness of all fields, grammar, spell check. That seems obvious, but it happens all the time. People with spelling errors in their personal statement, like, have it read by other people if you can. Just triple check everything that it is, because those things translate to a lack of professionalism on the receiver's end. If you didn't care enough about this personal statement to make sure it was free of spelling errors, what does that say about you? It shouldn't be judged necessarily that way, but it is. So just be super careful about that. Again, the personal statement can't really be overemphasized. I think this should be a much more longitudinal thing than I think many students first appreciate. This should be written over months, in my opinion, and rewritten a number of times. So just give that the emphasis that it needs. And then confirm that letters of recommendations and transcripts have been received promptly by schools. Letters of recommendation, one thing we didn't touch on is sometimes they can be challenging to get through to the finish line. These people that you're asking are often busy and have other things on their workload, and this can be pushed to their back burner often. And so you may need to send multiple reminders to make sure that is getting there on time, and have plan Bs in case so-and-so who's kind of unreliable can't get your letter in. So just ideally making sure you're on top of all your timelines, including your letters and transcripts.
Awesome. So we're just about to hop into our next Q&A, but we would absolutely love to ask our audience a favor, and we want to hear from you. We, of course, value your feedback. If you take out your phone, scan that QR code, it actually leads you back to a 3, 4, maybe 5 question survey. Um, and what that really allows us to do is to continue improving these webinars and offering better guidance in future sessions. And this is really where we get to learn what you want to see from us. And then we take that back to our team, and then we reach out to panelists, and we all just work together to create the best sessions possible. I promise you, it's a quick minute of your time, and it does wonders for us. And of course, we would really appreciate it. With that being said, I'd love to start our Q&A session. So we have a ton of questions in the chat, and we have a ton of time. So this is great. Let's start with, so Austin asks, I've heard that pre-med students should stay away from utilizing extracurriculars and volunteering from high school in the AMCAS application. Is this true?
I wouldn't put a number on, I would say close to 90% yes. The only exception I would say is if you're continuing something from high school through college and it continues to be very meaningful, showing growth, impact, and reflection, I think that would be the only exception. But I would say I think I purged all of my stuff from high school because I had a completely different college experience.
Yeah, I would say almost always yes. Again, Austin has a great point. And I would also add, if it's longitudinal for sure, or not for sure, but if it's longitudinal and meaningful, probably yes. And then sometimes there are like very unique circumstances where you had like a very meaningful global surgery or global health thing that you went on that shows narrative, like that you've done again since college, or that's part of your narrative, like that's something you're interested in. Sometimes it's acceptable, but I would say vast majority of things should not be left over from high school.
Awesome. Austin, I love the fact that your cat is just looking up.
Yes, this is real.
So cute. Our extra host tonight.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a really interesting question. How would one present maturity in an application for those who are on an accelerated path and will be 17 at the time of application, which I think is absolutely incredible. Just before I pass it off to Austin and Katie, that's incredible. Good job.
Yeah, I think I was 19 when I graduated high school. That's wild. I don't know how to effectively answer this, except you will immediately stand out from that path that you took. That's amazing. Great work for doing that. And I hope you continue to be as passionate about this path as you are right now. I think the same sort of approach applies. You just won't have as much time to do a lot of this stuff. And so planning is that much more important, especially on an accelerated path. You need to line things up even more so than people who maybe have an extra wiggle room of a year to figure things out. So specific things to demonstrate maturity, I think most of what we went over today, and just making sure you have a cohesive application, you show those experiences that have led you to this decision at such a young age, and then presenting yourself in a mature way does wonders, because again, you're being compared to peers who are younger, and if you show that you are mature for your age, that already gives you an advantage. These admissions committees are not static robots. They will understand the context of your application if you present it appropriately.
Yeah, I think as much as that is impressive, it also kind of puts a chip on your shoulder, so to speak, in your application. It does lean towards, immediately being received as how could this person have had as much experiences as others that took longer. I would think that the best way to demonstrate maturity in your application is to do that through introspection. So if you can demonstrate that this is a well thought out passion and path for you, and that this is not something that you take lightly or that you just chose because it sounded cool, if you can demonstrate that in your personal statement, like have support for this decision, I think that would demonstrate maturity in a way that would be convincing, theoretically.
Let us know if that helped. I'm curious. Okay, I love the next question, and I think it's relevant to so many people. For someone who finds it a little challenging to open up to people, what advice do you have regarding how to find the right mentors and to build good relationships with them without having it seemed forced?
Yeah, this is a good question. I did find this to be, I am, I think, relatively extroverted, and I still found this quite challenging because it can seem very forced and like, I know that I'm going to need a letter from you in 6 months, and so this is awkward for me. But honestly, I just try to find some common ground and develop rapport with them as a person. So if this is like, say, a professor, um, you can find common ground in that you pick a professor in whose class that you enjoy and perhaps whose personality and mannerisms that you just vibe with or get along with and enjoy. It makes it easier to talk to that person. And so one of my recommendations sometimes and what worked for me is like going to office hours and talking about the content until it turns into perhaps something a hair more professionally social, like how was your weekend type stuff. So I think it with enough of that kind of course content or whatever context it is that you're talking to this letter writer, with enough of that background and context conversation, it kind of lends itself to a more social and relatable kind of interaction and relationship. It can be a weird thing. And sometimes they're not going to be your best friend. They're not going to be, at your wedding theoretically, but just like, just something where they can understand, they can give an understanding of who you are as a person, your work ethic, your interests, things like that. And for example, like physicians that you're shadowing, they know why you're shadowing. They know that you may need a letter of recommendation. That's not an awkward thing to ask for them. They've been through the process. So I think it's a little less awkward in that situation where, they kind of expect that for most people, I would say. But yeah, I think it's easiest to just start with whatever, context that you meet them in or need them in, and then kind of go from there and hope that the relationship kind of blossoms into something that's a little bit more professionally personal. What do you think, Austin?
No, I agree. And if you have more time, which is preferable, exposure. It's just like getting, every single chance you have an opportunity to interact with them. You don't have to force that interaction. Just be there, be present. If it's an extra sort of thing, you're probably already used to doing extracurriculars and extra credits. So take advantage of that to build a relationship. And by the time you're asking for the letter, they'll be like, oh yeah, I recognize this. Like you will have already developed that relationship, and then it'll be an easy question to ask.
Awesome. So next question. If a school gives committee letters for LORs, what to do to help oneself in this scenario?
Now, what do you think? That's a tough one, Austin.
Yeah, my University of Denver actually did that. And I thought it was an advantage in the sense of with the committee letter, you usually have a person who is known for writing these letters, like synthesize everything for you. The key part to that is not letting your guard down, because even though someone may be helping you put things together in a packet, so to speak, you still have to do the legwork to individually find the people who are going to go into that packet. So the same rules apply. It's just that sometimes you have to work with an additional person to be selective in how things are going to go in there. For my instance, my pre-health advisor was also the one who ran the committee. She essentially ran everything on campus, but she was able to put it all together. And I think the packet that was received was done in a great way. Not that I got to see it, but the short answer to that is treat it just like the individual letters, get those relationships going. And then eventually you're going to be asking for letters that go into a committee letter. And then they do their backroom stuff to figure out like how to synthesize and write certain things in that way.
Okay. Wow. Awesome. Awesome job, everyone. There's so many questions in the chat. And we're happy to answer as many of them as we can. So the next question is, what jobs would you recommend for gaining clinical experience? And maybe both of you can speak to your experiences as well.
Yeah, my clinical experiences were mostly through working as a clinical scribe. Ideally, if you can, I think that's a great experience just in general. It actually helped give me a lot of understanding going into medical school about like common diagnoses and treatments and things like that. So just some background knowledge. But couple of things about that. If you're interested and you have a long enough time in it, which I would recommend having more than a year of scribing experience, you can climb the ladder a little bit and become a manager of a clinical facility or whatever it may be. That looks like good leadership as well. And then, so you get leadership and clinical hours from that. I was going to say, and it can, if you are smart about and have the opportunity about where you scribe for, it can actually also demonstrate support of your narrative. So for example, at the time I was interested in primary care and I scribed in a primary care setting. I had volunteer opportunities in that setting. And so it can even just be as another piece of data to support your interest in this path. That is my experience with it. What else do you have, Austin?
Yeah, this is all dependent, I think, on opportunity too. So University of Denver, not a big pre-health place. We actually were able to found like an EMS club, and there was a lot of people like me who became EMTs, and we became on-campus EMTs and worked with the administration to go to a lot of the calls, and that was really impactful. And then on the side, we did like concerts in the private venues and covered that sort of things, and that exposed you to pre-hospital care, and also you get that certification, which is awesome. But I think that's really important. I think scribe, that level of engagement that you can get at the college level is super important. Scribes, MAs, EMTs, CNAs, which is a super tough job as well. Those are all look really good, whether they're paid, volunteer, or a mixture of both. I think it's important at the end of the day, if you're doing clinical experience, to have a mix of volunteering with a mix of paid, just so it shows that you're serving another person or group of people. And I think the way I established that was I also worked as this care coordinator for a free clinic. And that wasn't technically like fully clinical, but it was coordinating clinical duties. And so I think of that as kind of a hybrid in that way.
Yeah, I think those are, you touched on the most common ways to get clinical opportunities, and they are that way because for a reason. There's a good volume of them generally. There's even remote scribe options now. So if you don't find any in your area, I would say recommend in person is better. But if you can't find any in person in your area, there's also remote scribe opportunities.
Very cool. I actually didn't know that at all. So you learn something new every day. The next question, and now this is a fantastic question. I think both of you are going to have a fun time with this. If your GPA is a little lower than the listed criteria for a specific school, is it still possible to get admission if you meet all other criterias?
I think just generally the answer is yes. Of course, the caveat being like the whole application does matter. What others? So when I have clients and I'm working with clients or students, no person's application is going to be perfectly strong in all areas that we are looking for as reviewers. So if you have strong basically everything else and your GPA is a hair shy or a couple hairs shy of our average GPA acceptance, that is really not going to sway the needle too much. If there are other weak parts of your application and your GPA is a little weak and your MCAT's a little weak, that overall paints a picture of maybe not the same level of applicant that we're used to interviewing. So really, if everything else meets criteria and you have this otherwise strong application, GPA being a little bit lower is not the be all end all and will not kind of damn your whole application. That being said, a lot of schools do have some kind of a GPA cutoff that they look for. So it depends on how little low it is. But I would say in the context of what I think I'm understanding from the question, it's definitely still an option to apply to those schools if they're not quite at the average cutoff. And that's usually it's an average GPA that they're looking at. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah. And when you're looking at those figures, look at whether they say mean or median, because if it's median, 50% of the people who matriculate have a GPA lower than that. If it's a mean, is a little bit more nuanced and you can't figure out a lot of stuff from it. But if anything, that should be encouraging it. Totally agree with Katie. It's about the whole package.
Now, there's a second part to that question, which is what is the minimum GPA you need? Austin, I saw your face light up. Did you want to take that one?
I think I lit up because it's a hard one to answer. And this is the thing where looking at people have tried to answer this question through different things like creating the Lizzie M score, which was not a thing when I was applying, like this idea of hybridizing the GPA and MCAT. And in the same way, if you have an outstanding MCAT and a relatively lower GPA, they're probably going to ask you about what may have happened, and your job is to explain that. The reason I'm saying not a number right now is because like a minimum GPA, when I think about it, is I would hopefully love to see something workable over like the low threes. There are, of course, you'll see statistics. Like if you go on the MSAR, you can see a lot about who enters medical school with certain GPAs, and there's like all this research about it. There are going to be cutoffs for certain schools that are different from others. This is why generally there can't be like a minimum that's universally appreciated. Beyond that, which knowing it's going to be more difficult the lower GPA you have. And that's where you have to stand out in other aspects or consider a post-bac program, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree with everything. I wouldn't even give a number. It's so, I don't want to discourage anyone that has a low number and just because you have a high number, that also doesn't mean that you're definitely going to get in or anything like that. So the number it's hard to give like a cutoff value in my opinion, because really the rest of the application makes a difference. Also the trend of your grades, in my opinion, makes a difference. Yeah. Also your science GPA versus your overall. So it's hard for me to give a straight up number. Low threes seems like, it's still certainly still possible depending on the rest of your application. Yeah, I second everything Austin said.
Great job. Okay. We have a few more minutes, so I think we can just keep rolling. Regarding extracurriculars, what advice do you have to determine whether you are doing enough or not?
Oof. Yeah, I remember this feeling distinctly, and you're just always feeling like you're never doing enough, and my neighbor is always doing more than me, and how can I compete? That's a very real anxiety. I think everyone is different, and that's the thing too. Everyone's extracurriculars are different in terms of meaningfulness, hours of doing them, and longitudinal components. So it's hard to compare. It's not really apples to apples. Like you're comparing hours of one thing to hours of another. So my kind of impression of this is more of like a well-being impression, which is you should be maintaining your MCAT and your GPA are very important, fortunately or unfortunately. And so you should be able to maintain the GPA that you are shooting for while maintaining what other opportunities that you have. Like, so the GPA, in my opinion, classes come first, MCAT studying comes first when you get to that point. And then what other recreational or other activities you can add in to augment your application should be based off that. If you don't have the time to maintain your GPA because you're doing other opportunities, your priorities are not in the right place, in my opinion. So if you can do a couple of things that are meeting some of your criteria or check boxes for your application while maintaining your GPA, then you're doing enough. That's kind of the rough way that I estimate it.
So I'd love to then follow up with another question. Is there a ranking of what experiences are valued more than others?
You guys, these are great questions. These are so hard. These are good questions.
They're also asking how many hours of clinical experience is expected?
What do you think, Austin?
This for med school especially, this is not as straightforward as, for example, my wife's a PA and she had a minimum number of clinical hours she needed to apply. Otherwise, I wouldn't even look at her application. I don't think the grand majority of med schools have such a requirement, because part of going to be a doctor is the research component. So that's the hard thing, is like you're looking at a total number of hours. And I understand the question, like within this probably covers both the research and clinical side of things. It really depends on when you get started on things. I've seen anywhere from, like, if you look at the full 3-4 years, if you started in college with something, having upwards of 2,000 hours by the end of it would be great. That's a big goal to shoot for. And that can be spread across multiple experiences too. And then you got to remember, if you're doing research plus a clinical thing, you can start splitting those numbers up. And I want to go back to Katie's point, the GPA in MCAT, that number matters a lot more than some round number that you'll get for the hours estimate, because they often don't have a lot of double checking. Like, of course, you want to demonstrate integrity and not overestimate your hours, but they can rely on the GPA and MCAT as more objective evaluations of your true performance, whereas you can essentially say anything with hours, and you want to be realistic with it, but trying to get upwards of 1,000, 2,000-ish hours for your total cumulative clinical hours, plus or minus some research, would be really great if you can.
And that's saying that is a strength of your application. Not everyone will have that many hours, but that's like a good thing to shoot for. If you fall a little short, don't, your application's not like, doomed or anything like that.
So we have a few more moments left. I'd love to go with one final question, and I think this is one of my favorite questions to ask our panelists. So how did you guys know that medicine was the right path for you?
It's a good question. I love this question too. I think I could talk about it for longer, but I'll try and keep it short. My answer in short is just experiences. So I honestly thought medicine was going to be too hard for me, and I wasn't smart enough, and I just didn't think that I was cut out for it. And so I tried to do other things. So I shadowed dentists and nurses and optometrists, and I tried to do something else because I was like, I don't think I can cut it in med school. So I shadowed a wide variety of things that just interested me from like a knowledge and, application perspective. I really liked biology, and I was like, okay, I'll just I tried to do research, like be a research scientist. I tried all of these things or shadowed these people that were already doing these things in enough ways that gave me information about what my daily life would look like in that field. And part of that, of course, was shadowing physicians as well, just to see if I really did like it or didn't like it. And ultimately, after doing all of that legwork, and I think that I would highly recommend that, like while you are in this early period of deciding your career, get as much exposure to things that even remotely sound interesting to you, because you really don't know what one thing sounds like in theory versus living that life every single day. Those can be two totally different things. So get a lot of opportunities, like honestly, cold email people that are doing jobs that you think sound cool, because most people would be totally fine with you coming to work with them for a day or two. So I did a lot of that. Ultimately found that the relationship between physician and patient and the content of which they were, like the conversations they were having, I found those to be the most like meaningful and fulfilling, and something that I think that I was like well suited for. Like I had interpersonal relationship dynamics that I thought were well suited for that relationship. Not to mention, I just really found the content that we had to study interesting. So that's kind of what led me to this path. And then once I was in it, I found some subspecialty things that I just really was drawn to. I think some good feedback or pearls that I received was like, if you find yourself reading about topics just for fun, just for out of interest, that's a good pointer that you're interested in that thing and that you would find that fulfilling on a daily basis. And the second thing is, once you do these shadowing experiences, pick the most mundane, boring day in that field. And if you are still happy at the end of that day, then that's a good indicator that you would be happy-ish in that field. So, it's not like you go and see some cool cardiac surgery and it's open heart and it's like the most exhilarating thing you've ever seen. Well, yeah, that's going to be a great day, unless you pass out in the OR or something, but that's going to be a good day. But like, what about the days where they're just in clinic for 10 hours? How do you tolerate that? Is that still interesting to you? And so that would be my advice, is find something where you still are interested and happy and fulfilled on the most boring day in that field.
Yeah. I can't say it any better than Katie, except to say, medicine is a wide field. And I think both of us, based on what Katie said and what I've experienced as well, did a great job of looking at all those other careers. And I want to say that even though being a doctor is great, there are plenty of other paths to take too. Look at being a physician assistant, nurse practitioner, a nurse, physical therapist. Depending on your interest there, really, really seriously consider putting yourself in the shoes of those other careers. And if you find yourself gravitating back to being a doctor, it's a great career. You get to be a guardian for people in their toughest times. And the personal reason I went into it is because I have no one in my family in medicine, and seeing them navigate the unknown with great doctors and not so great doctors has really showed me that I want to be there as kind of a beacon for other people. And that relationship Katie was talking about between the patient and physician is a very sacred one. And it's definitely an honor to be in this position. And I think it's very honorable that you all are considering it too. But I want you to know that it's not the end all be all to apply to med school just because it's the highest degree in any way. So you can still have similar impacts. This is just speaking from my wife's across the wall right now. She has a great career as well. Just seriously consider everything, and then you won't have any regrets when you become an MD or a DO.
Well said.
Extremely well said. And with that being said, you got a thumbs up. With that being said, I think this is a perfect time to bring tonight's webinar to a close. Austin, Katie, once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your beacons and your feedback and your lived experiences. Thank you to our audience. Again, questions, comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to book that one-on-one. We are always ready and willing to help you and support you through this process. Katie, Austin, you're getting lots of thumbs up and hearts in the chat. I hope you see that.
Thanks for having us, you guys.
I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next week.